Okay, I'm hoping you guys are feeling pretty comfortable, especially with price elasticity of demand. I want to introduce you to three other common elasticities that you'll run into. And we'll go ahead and we'll call this Chapter 6, Part 3. We're going to cover price elasticity of supply, income elasticity, and cross-price elasticity. All right, let's take a look at the price elasticity of supply. Just like the price elasticity of demand was interested in how responsive consumers were to a change in prices, the price elasticity of supply is going to be interested in how responsive producers are to a change in prices. Our ranges are going to be essentially identical. If you calculate ES and it comes out to be greater than 1, it's going to be elastic. If it's between 0 and 1, it's going to be inelastic. And if it's equal to 1, it is unitary. So the ranges are exactly the same as ED. When you're thinking about calculating it, the only difference is that we're now talking about a percentage change in quantity supplied with respect to a percentage change in price. But it's going to be the same exact thing. Use the midpoint convention to calculate the top and use it to calculate the bottom. And of course, absolute value won't matter because the supply curve is positively sloped. So whenever price goes up, QS should be going up, always with a positive, right? And similarly, price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. Negative over negative will also give you a positive. In any event, what is going to influence whether or not firms have an elastic response or they have an inelastic response? First thing that's obvious is how able are they to bump up production? If they have a bunch of excess capacity, they're not running all of their factory at full speed or full tilt, then it's pretty easy for them to respond and actually bump up production if prices rise. It's also easy for them to bump up production if it's relatively easy to get inputs or to move factors like land, labor, and capital towards them when they need them. If those things are relatively inaccessible, then of course you're going to expect a more inelastic response. If they have available inventories, there's nothing easier than just releasing inventories to increase the quantity supplied. High levels of inventory would seem to suggest a high ES or an elastic response. Length and complexity, however, are going to suggest lower ESs, right? If in fact it's a very, very lengthy and complex process to produce your product, like a Boeing jet, it doesn't matter if prices rise overnight. You're not going to be able to get a jet out the door for months. Hence, you're going to have a relatively inelastic response. Okay, so these three, if you have excess capacity, inventories, and high mobility of factors, these are all going to suggest relatively elastic responses. This last one, however, length and complexity, seems to suggest that you'll get relatively inelastic responses. Okay, so there's just a few determinants that you can think about in terms of what makes firms more or less likely to have elastic or inelastic responses. All right, let's take a look at another elasticity, income elasticity. Income elasticity is simply asking about the percentage change in quantity demanded with respect to a change in income. Now, what's really going on here is for a given price, we're asking what happens to quantity when income changes. Well, when income changes, assuming it's a normal good, you're going to see that there is an increase in demand. And at that same exact price, we are now going to see that there is a larger quantity demanded than there used to be. This change in quantity here is the one that we're talking about here. I don't want you to think that we're moving along a demand curve. We're actually seeing a change in quantity demanded based on a shift. So if you go through and you calculate your number from this and you get a positive number, you are going to know that what you are dealing with is a normal good. Because of course, increase your income and you increase quantity demanded. That's normal. Or a decrease in your income and you decrease quantity demanded. Both of these are going to generate positive numbers. Okay? So you know you've got a normal good if you get a value greater than 0. If you in fact get a value greater than 1, they often refer to this as a luxury. Okay, still a normal good, but they're going to tell you that it's a luxury good because it is income elastic. In other words, it tends to be quite sensitive to changes in income. If you get a number between 0 and 1, it's normal, but they usually are going to refer to these as necessities or income inelastic because it's not particularly sensitive to changes in income. Our other scenario that we haven't discussed yet is when you end up with an income elasticity that's less than 0, an actual negative number. And do not take the absolute value in this case. That will mess everything up. This particular elasticity, you've got to leave positives and negatives because, of course, negative is going to mean that you have an inferior good, because what you've got going on here is when you increased income, they actually requested less of the object, or alternatively, when you decreased their income, they actually asked for more. This is the kind of relationship that will produce a negative number, and of course, this is how we define inferior goods. So, hearkening back to chapter 3, when we were learning about our shifts, this is how we would figure out whether or not you have a normal or an inferior good. They're going to go out, they're going to look at the data, they're going to crunch the numbers. If it comes out with a negative income elasticity, it's going to be classified as an inferior good. And our last elasticity that we're going to examine today is cross price. And you'll see this abbreviated EAB, or occasionally you'll see it denoted EXY. It's not really standard. Either one of them would work. And what we're thinking about here is that we want to know how responsive the change in quantity demanded of A is going to be to the percentage change in price of good B. So you might be asking about how responsive is the quantity demanded for lemons when we increase the price of lime, or how responsive is the quantity demanded for bacon when we see a decrease in the price of eggs. You could look at either of these sorts of things, and I hope you're recognizing from my examples so far that this is how we're going to tell whether or not we are dealing with substitutes or we are dealing with complements. If you go ahead and you calculate these numbers out, once again using your midpoint convention, and you end up with a positive number, you know that you are dealing with a substitute, because when the price rose, you actually are going to see that there is an increase in quantity demanded for the other good, which would imply that they're substituting away from the now relatively more expensive good towards the other good. Similarly, if the price drops and all of a sudden people move away from the other good, you would assume that they're going after the now relatively cheaper. Both of these, once again, are going to produce positive numbers. If you get a negative number, you're dealing with a complement. This would be like our bacon and eggs example. If in fact bacon gets more expensive, then we would expect to see that there is going to be a drop in quantity demanded for eggs, and vice versa. If bacon gets cheap, people are going to want to buy more eggs. Both of these are going to produce negative numbers in the cross price elasticity, and this is how we know that we are dealing with a complement. One other thing to add to this, just like in our last slide on income elasticity, what we've got going on here is a shift in the demand curve. So at any given price, we are asking, based on a change in the price of some other good, right? Not the good in question, some other good, what that's going to do to the demand for our good in question. So for our bacon and eggs example, if in fact the price of bacon were to decline, then bacon's cheaper, probably going to buy some more bacon, and in our eggs market, we're going to see that there's an overall increase in demand for eggs. So of course, we are going to see a higher QD for eggs. Okay. Not moving along a curve. These are changes in quantity caused by a shift. Hopefully that helps you keep things straight. Okay, let's do another one of these now you try. So, which of the following producers would you expect to support a tax on skydiving and why? Got bungee jumping outfitters, and the data suggests that they have a cross price elasticity of 4.2, and you have nylon harness makers, and they have a cross price elasticity which is negative 2.3. So go ahead and pause the video, take some time, figure out what your answer is going to be, and the next slide I'll kind of walk you through a solution. Okay, let's go ahead and talk our way through this. We had bungee jumpers, and their cross price elasticity was 4.2, and we had our harness makers, and they had a cross price elasticity of 2.3, but it was negative. What does this really mean? I want you to remember that we're talking about the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price of the other good. In this case, skydiving. So in order to work through this, you've got to understand a little bit about what we learned in the chapter on taxes. If you impose a tax, you would expect that the price that's going to get paid for skydiving is going to rise. So these cross price elasticities are going to help you figure out how that rising price in skydiving impacts bungee jumping outfitters here and harness makers here. So if their EAB is 4.2, I think it's easiest to just turn it back into a fraction. What this means is that for every 1% increase in price for skydiving, bungee jumping folks are going to experience a 4.2% increase in quantity demanded for bungee jumping. Of course, this is a positive number and a substitute. So when you think about it, bungee jumping outfitters are delighted if there's a tax on skydiving because it drives more business to them. Harness makers, on the other hand, feel a little bit differently about this. When you're out there skydiving, they often use nylon harnesses, and they're going to use this for tandem jumps and strapping you into parachutes, the whole 9 yards. Of course, what I'm getting at here is that harnesses are a complement, and that is evidenced by the number here. Because for every 1% increase in the price of skydiving, harness makers actually lose 2.3% in quantity demanded. This, of course, implies that they are a complement. So, harness makers are going to be adamantly opposed to a tax in skydiving because it's likely to cost them money and customers. Bungee jumping folks would be gleefully happy about taxing skydiving because it's going to drive more and more people to bungee jumping when they're looking for their adrenaline fix. Hopefully that helps you to see how these sort of things can be useful for understanding economic behavior.